Another topic that would be great from the soundtrack of Stranger Things is remixing or arranging. There are two in particular that I was just floored when I heard it and how they had done that. So this would be, I think, really a great resource if you wanted to do a unit with your students on remixing or arranging a song that someone else has composed. So the first one to consider is Heroes. I mentioned this earlier. So Heroes was originally written and recorded by David Bowie and a guy named Brian Eno. And it's a great song from the 1970s. But in Stranger Things, they use a different version by Peter Gabriel. And this rearrangement or remixing of Heroes was done by Peter Gabriel and Bob Ezrin. And the way that it's used in the series, it's first used, I believe, in season 1, where Will, who's one of the primary characters in the series, they believe, he's been missing. And they get a bulletin that there's been a body discovered at this lake. And so they all rush down to the lake and they see them pulling what they think is the body of Will from the lake. And during that scene, you hear this remix of Heroes that's done by Peter Gabriel. And it's just an incredibly moving, I think, just wonderful reimagining of that song. And the thing about the song, it's used again and again throughout the series. Now, the thing about it is, when we first hear Peter Gabriel's version of Heroes in the series, you hear it when they see Will's body being pulled from the lake and they think that Will's dead. But the thing about it is, he's not really dead. He's actually really alive. And you're going to hear Heroes again in the series at other points when there is a character that they believe has been killed or died, but really has not. So not to give away too many spoilers, but at the end of season 3, one of the adult characters, Hopper, they believe has been killed. And you'll hear the song again by Peter Gabriel, Heroes, but we find out that later on, he's actually still alive. So this would be a great song to compare the original, to have the students listen to Heroes and think about what are the instrument sounds that are used, what is the texture of the recording, what's the tempo, all these things about the original, and compare it to the rearrangement that was done by Peter Gabriel and Bob Ezrin. And when you can relate it back to how it was used in the series for the dramatic or theatrical effect, there's really a big contrast between the original and the rearrangement. But I also think that within the context of the show, that there's a real opportunity for really engaging and rich discussion and sort of compare and contrast activities that students can do as they think about how to do a remix, that it's more than just, taking an original vocal stem and just adding a beat to it. So great music, I think, to use for that. The other one, at the end of season 4, and this is actually season 4, volume 2, we hear this remix of Separate Ways, Worlds Apart, which was originally released by a band called Journey in the 1980s, probably one of the biggest mega bands of the 1980s. Steve Perry, his voice is so totally recognizable. So they record this song Separate Ways in the 1980s. Well, in volume 2 of season 4, we get a remix of Separate Ways it's just, to me, it's amazing. I get goosebumps right now thinking about it. But the way it's used in the series for the dramatic effect, but musically what they did with it is just like, oh my gosh, that might be one of the coolest things I've ever heard. So there's actually 2 versions of the remix. The first one, the short one that is actually used in the film, is done by Bryce Miller and Alloy Tracks. And it's so cool. It's so unexpected. If you're not familiar with it, go listen to it. But there's also an extended version that Steve Perry actually gets involved with, the extended remix that he does with Bryce Miller. And both are just fantastic. So again, if you take the original version of Separate Ways, and you can actually take that original version of Separate Ways and compare it to the Stranger Stuff theme song. And there's a lot of similarities, whereas the theme song from Stranger stuff is this arpeggiated C major 7 chord that's just going up and down a C major chord. And then in separate ways uses a similar sort of arpeggiated keyboard thing, but it incorporates some chromaticism to it. But there's so much you can do to compare and contrast the original Separate Ways with the original Stranger Stuff theme song. And then when you go back and listen to how they remixed it and how they incorporated some of the elements of the Stranger Things theme song along with some of the elements of the original Separate Ways. Again, I think musically, it's super, super fantastic. And so for those out there that like to complain that today's music that's being written is like just trash, junk kind of music, well, I would present this as one of the things that's been created in 2022 that I think is musically just really fantastic and really sophisticated. So those are the two things, remixing and arranging, that could be used from Stranger Stuff. The next thing, original composition. If you wanted to, work with students, and hopefully, students are working on creating original compositions, but particularly if you're in a lab setting where maybe you don't have a space to really do a lot of audio recording or vocal recording, if you wanted to dig into just original instrumental composition, there's super great stuff in the soundtrack from Stranger Stuff. So again, I mentioned earlier, the composers that did all the original music for the series are Kyle Dixon and Michael Stein. And a lot of the instruments they use are synthesized sounds, which is, ubiquitous with the 1980s. But the thing about these original compositions is that if you go through and listen to music that they've written as background music for different scenes, there's a lot of stuff there that you can dig into from a standpoint of teaching music theory to a standpoint of creating music for a specific mood or a specific scene. So as you go through and look at the soundtrack, and I'm going to share a website with you just in a second that is really great to check out. So from season 1, some of the original compositions, their titles are like Hawkins Lab, 11, Kids, The Upside Down. So these are all things that anyone who's watched the series is going to be very familiar with what those terms are and how Dixon and Stein have composed music that is supposed to elicit sounds from these scenes. In much the same way, if you listen to Star Wars and John Williams, how Darth Vader has a theme and Luke has a theme and Leia has a theme. This is the same idea of how they're composing this original music and how it's being used in the soundtrack to accompany the scene or accompany, that particular character. So from season 2, you've got, Chicago, where 11 ends up in Chicago with this, kind of different group of influences on her. From season 3, In the Void, Starcourt, which those of you from here in Georgia or Gwinnett County was filmed at the Gwinnett Place Mall. And then it's interesting, like from season 1, they have the tune they wrote, Kids. In season 3, they've written a tune called Not Kids Anymore. That's another great place to sort of compare and contrast, how the actors in the series have actually aged and how they are writing music to reflect that. And then season 4, things like Project Nina, Hawkins National Lab, Demogorgons. Again, these are all things that anyone who's watched the series, aka your students, is going to understand these terms. And so when you listen to the music that was composed from that, they're going to have an image in their head of who that person or what that place is. And they should be able to relate to how the sound of the music relates to the actual person. Because in a lot of cases with this, most of these compositions are short. Again, they're used as background music for a scene. So for a lot of it, it may be music that they haven't really even paid attention to, because if you're focused on the drama of what's going on, you may not be listening to or paying much attention to the background music. But once you draw your attention to it, it's really great discussion to have with students about how that music even subconsciously impacts how we perceive what we're seeing or how we perceive the action or the emotion that's going on in the scene, which is great topics to discuss for students who might be interested in pursuing, say, a career as a composer for film music. So, original composition, Kyle Dixon, Michael Stein. Editing, sound effects, plugins, ambience, reverb. Again, as you go through the soundtrack for this series, there all kinds of examples that you can find where the sound production staff has used editing, sound effects, plugins that we teach our students to use in the DAW all the time through the show. So, I mean, there's examples like in season 4 where one of the characters, well, Kate Bush is running up that hill, becomes very prominent in season 4. Well, sometimes the character is listening to that song through headphones. Sometimes she goes from listening on headphones and then she takes the headphones off. Sometimes you hear the song playing out loud. So there are examples where you can go in there and find the same song being played throughout a scene and talk about how that sound changes and how the editing and sound effects were used to create those sounds changing. Another song that's prominent in season 4 is the Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong Dream a Little Dream. As you listen to that song in different scenes, there are different effects and plugins that are added to change the sound, to distort it in different settings. And so again, that's something else. Another example you can use of how editing and sound effects can be used to alter the sound of the music or something else, depending on the environment that we're supposed to be hearing it in. So everything from music playing inside of cars to, in season 1, one of the songs that is really prominent through season 1 is Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash. And it's used in a lot of different contexts in season 1, so that sometimes you hear it coming from like another room. Sometimes you hear it as if you're standing right in front of the speaker. And so using or finding songs and places in the series where students can listen and compare and contrast how effects, editing techniques have been used to change the way that the music sounds, again, is another great resource that you can plug into a unit about these things in your music tech class. If you find these videos useful, please share this with your colleagues. Tell them to check it out. And always, you're welcome to visit the website, www.mutechteachernet.com. Advocate, support, inspire, and create.